Hello, friends. Welcome to KCD Office Hours for this June 29th. If you've never been to Office Hours before, this is basically once a week. I do a Zoom call where you can join and ask me questions. If you can't join in person, then that's fine too. You can ask on Discord. And let me get my screen shared so that we can all see what we're talking about here. Sorry, I'm a little bit late today. I had some technical challenges with my computer, but should be working now. So yeah, you can come to the Discord. Should be linked in the description, I think. kcd.im/discord will get you here. Once you go through the onboarding process and everything, you should be good. And yeah, feel free to just drop your questions in here and I'll go through these, but I always give priority to the people who are actually in the meeting. And it looks like we've got two other folks here, and I see Alyssa is here, and I see Alyssa's question right here. So I'll start out with your question, Alyssa. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, so you're working on a component library. It needs to be bundled and other teams can install. So you have two questions, compound components. Here, I'll pull that up.
Yeah.
Wanted to show to see if I'm implementing correctly. Okay, yeah, cool. Let's take a look.
Yeah, I followed what you did, and I have like the Epic React course, and I've looked at your lessons there. So this is kind of like my very basic implementation of
Yeah.
component. I'm just want to make sure I'm on the right track since it's kind of the first time I'm implementing this sort of pattern.
Yeah. So this let's see. This looks fine. Like this is a perfectly good implementation of a pattern. I'm right from what I can see. Okay, so you're sharing the size to these other elements, and they're using the size for like how wide the description should be or something.
Yeah, kind of like the font size and all that. A question I had was like, I don't really want the consumers of it to like be able to I just want to be able to pass in the size to like, I guess the main level, like just the main card. But I know to appease TypeScript, I had to kind of pass it down to each thing. I guess there's not really a way to get around that. Is there? Or
yeah. So TypeScript is definitely makes this approach to compound components a little tricky with this clone element thing. And so yeah, you have to say it's optional when actually it shouldn't be optional, stuff like that. So what I would say is there are two things. First of all, in Epic React, after showing you the clone element approach, I show you the more flexible context approach. And that's what I recommend as a default now. I pretty much never recommend doing this anymore. Honestly, even in Epic React, I kind of say like, here's a way to do it. Like I kind of used this way as a stepping stone to get to the context approach. And in the updated version of Epic React, we're going to eliminate this one altogether because I think it's just not very useful. And so that's the first thing I would do is use the context approach, and then you don't have the TypeScript problems and everything there. And it also allows you to, if somebody wanted to put a div around the card title or something, then they would be able to do that. If you want to prevent them from being able to do that, then you still can. You could just do some runtime checking on the children and say, hey, make sure that, if it's type is string, then like throw an error or something. And I think actually I show how to do that in Epic React.
Yeah, I think you do.
Yeah. So if you wanted to do that, it looks like you're fine with this, but yeah.
Okay.
The second thing is for this specifically, if this is all that you're doing, I imagine you're going to be doing compound components for a bunch of other components. But for this specific use case, I don't know that compound components is all that useful because you can just rely on the cascade nature of CSS and I guess it kind of depends on how you are implementing the CSS. Here, you're just doing regular CSS. But yeah, so you could say.
Yeah, it was Sass before. I just kind of quickly copied over what we had in just to get a quick sandbox going.
Yeah. So if you're using regular CSS like this or Sass or whatever, then you can just say, instead of title XS, you'd say card XS title. And now you don't have to worry about passing the class name or anything like that.
Okay.
But yeah, you probably are going to be wanting to implement the compound components pattern in a lot of things. And so the way that this is structured is fine. I would use the context version, but yeah, you have the right idea.
Okay, gosh, yeah, I just wanted to make sure because another question I kind of was going to ask is like, how do you know when to use like compound components versus like not? I guess if it's like a very simple component, then you don't need to. But what I've seen a pattern happen at our company is that they kind of get like too many props. It's just like, oh, now we need it on the top and then on the bottom. And then so like, and our design team has a very bad habit of like, oh, like they want it like this, and then like they'll change it 2 months later. So I tried to like mitigate that by kind of making like, okay, well, if you want the title for some random reason at the bottom, here it is. But like, yeah, how do you kind of like make that distinction between like, okay, I should probably do a compound component for like something like this versus, just
yeah, that's a great question. I gave a talk about that a couple of years ago called Requisite React. So I will grab a link to that and stick it in Discord.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's a reply here. And hold on, no, that's the wrong one. The one I'm looking for, I gave it React Rally, and I cannot remember what I called it. Nope, simply React. That's the one.
Okay.
Yeah. So this one is Requisite React is fine, but this is the one that you're looking for.
Gotcha.
And I would watch the React Rally recording of this. The ByteConf one is fine. The ByteConf one is more recent. But it was just remote, and the in-person ones are always more engaging, I think. But in any case, yeah, I give a demonstration of exactly the problem that you're describing, where people are like, I need to customize it this way and that way and the other. And the idea is, what if instead of just throwing a bunch of props on the thing, we just restructure it so it's easy for them to do that, and using a programming principle that called inversion of control,
right?
Which I have a blog post about as well.
Yes. That one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll stick that one in there for anybody to take a look at as well. So to answer your question, when do you use compound components? It's pretty much whenever you have multiple components where you want to implicitly share state. And like you could just have a single component that controls all the stuff, but it's pretty often that you could break that single component into multiple pieces, and then you implement the compound components pattern to be able to communicate between those. And so, especially when it comes to rendering order, and people are like, oh, I want the title to be at the bottom. Well, you're like, yeah, okay. So literally just move this down to the bottom.
Right.
It becomes really like a very obvious thing there. So yeah, inversion of control can help a lot. And there was something else that I was going to mention. Oh, yeah. So it's very possible you could build a lot of your components on top of something like Radix.
Yeah.
And even further than that, like you could get a really great head start on that by building on top of something like ShadCN UI. This thing is like fantastic. I just adopted it in the Epic stack, and it just has what's really interesting about ShadCN, and I'll link to this also, and also Radix for anybody who is unfamiliar.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Radix because I've written about Radix actually, but I'm not familiar with Shad. So that's
yeah. So Shad is like, let's take Radix and Tailwind and stick them together and make it a pre-styled components for you. But what's really so the challenge with a component library that is open source is making it so that it's easy to customize. You start having to accept all these props for the class name for this and the class name for that and whatever. And that's why Radix is so great, because it's not styled at all beyond what is required for the accessibility goals. And so you get to totally customize it. However, that's actually a fair bit of work. And so what Shad does is or Shad CN, I don't know what to call this thing. What UI does is it's not a component library. Instead, it's just a bunch of examples of using Tailwind and Radix together to make beautiful components that you can very easily copy and paste into your project. So you start off in a really good place and then you customize it from there. And on top of that, it even has a CLI that will download things for you and get things set up. It's phenomenal. It's so great. So yeah, you can look at their examples and see like the code is all implemented here. And then once it's downloaded into your project, I'll show you in the Epic stack. Once it is in, then it's literally just copy pasted into your project. So if I go to the checkbox, for example, it's literally just like, here it is. You change it however you want. You commit it to your project. There's no updates or anything. It's not a component library. It's just an example that you can base things off of. So anyway, I'm a super fan. I think it's great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for that. I hadn't heard of that one. And yeah, I mean, I've been seeing the, kind of this headless component pattern being used for a while, and compound components are used, headless UI, Reach UI, all those kind of things. So, and I really like it because it adds a lot of flexibility. So I just was kind of experimenting with like doing it at work because I see that we tend to just tack on another prop every time we need to change the UI a little bit, but I don't want to over engineer things either. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to get your advice on kind of how to approach that kind of decision. So thanks.
Yeah. I find that like code it for the very specific thing that you're building. And then when people start needing to customize things, take a minute to step back and think, okay, how can I restructure this in such a way that people stop asking me to change things? And so that ultimately that ends up being an inversion of control thing where you just say, okay, you want to customize the way it's rendered. How about you just render it yourself? And that's where render props were really popular. And then hooks came out and kind of took over that role. And then compound components on top of that, where it's like there are very obvious sections to this component that kind of make it a whole. So yeah, hopefully that is helpful to you and what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. And it's my other question was just about if you have time, just about the styling. I'm trying to think how I can phrase it. Yeah, I'm kind of new to like bundling things stuff. And I wasn't sure like what's the best way, like if you have some type of base styles, how do you do that when there's not a real entry point, I guess?
I'm definitely familiar with this problem. I've wrestled with this a lot. When I was at PayPal, worked on PP React, an unfortunate name of a component library, but yeah, I think we've talked about that before. And getting the styles into the app is tricky. So at PayPal, it worked out because I was also responsible for PayPal scripts, which was our tooling tool. And so I knew what everybody was using for building their apps. And so I could just rely on the fact that they had Webpack installed. And so my library could like import CSS files directly, and I knew exactly how those would be treated and everything worked fine. But I definitely wouldn't do that today, especially at a company that has multiple projects that could be built in different ways. I mean, we've got Vite now, and I'm not sure whether Remix allows packages and node modules to import styles. I don't think that it does, especially when we're talking about server side stuff. You have to consider that as well if you're doing server rendering at all. And certainly if you're not doing it today, you may do it tomorrow. And if you rely on weird non-standard stuff, then you could be in trouble there too. So I wouldn't do non-standard things is all I'm saying for something that you're publishing to NPM. And so what Reach does is it actually builds a CSS file that it says, if you want to use this component, then you import it like regular, and then, but you also have to make sure this CSS file is on the page. And that works out pretty well because then they can use whatever tooling they use to get CSS onto the page. And the only thing that's annoying about that is it's just an extra step. And also there's no tree shaking with CSS. Like you can't say, I want this. Well, I mean, with Remix, what you can do, it's not tree shaking, but you can say, well, we only use this component on this page, and so we'll put this in the links for that page, and then it won't show up on the others. But that can be really annoying to think about with a reusable component. It's like, yeah, we're using the accordion on this page today, but now like tomorrow I'm going to use it there, so now I need to add it to that routes links page, and then this one, and from a user perspective, that's actually fine. It's actually great because they get caching across those pages, but they never load CSS on. But like, do you really want to do that on every route you're going to use a component? Probably not. And on top of that, you might use that component within another one, and now it's like an extra step, right? And actually, Remix is going to solve this problem, and it's going to be amazing in the future, where you can have routes or modules that are or components that are like routes that can have links and loaders and actions and everything that are not actually tied to the URL. And then you use those components in different routes, and it will automatically handle all of that stuff. So this problem will be solved in a great way in Remix. But again, not everybody's building with Remix, and you're building a reusable component library. So we're back to kind of square one. Another approach that I've taken in the past is just ship it as CSS and JS. And if they're not using my library for the library that I'm using for my CSS, then I'll bring it in, and they won't have to think about it. Lots of problems with that, especially when we're talking about server rendering. If that matters to anybody, and you probably want to leave yourself open for that. So I don't recommend that either. And another approach you could take is just use Tailwind. And the only or the primary drawback there is when they install your component, you have to tell them, okay, well, make sure to update your Tailwind config so that its just-in-time compiler includes the Tailwind classes in this library. So that way those Tailwind classes are available on time. So that would be like, where'd my editor go? So in the Tailwind config, you would just have to tell them, you need to update your content to include a path that matches my library so that it can find those Tailwind classes. That's actually not terrible. It's fine. But again, it does require Tailwind. And so like people would have to think about things that way. Another approach might be vanilla extract, but again, like that, what I'm pretty sure you could do with vanilla extract, you can do like a build time thing as part of your library that generates a CSS file, and then again, it's just kind of back to the whole. Okay, now you need to you can use this, but now you also need to bring in the CSS file wherever you're going to use it. Okay, so with all those different options stated, what I would suggest is actually just a CSS file for the component. That and you can generate that CSS file however you want. It could be a vanilla extract thing, a Sass thing, a post CSS thing, whatever. But I would suggest just a CSS file. And then that way, no matter how they are building for the web, they just include that CSS file however they do it. And what typically you'll end up doing in a Remix project is you'll stick it in your root here as one of your links, and then it's just installed there. Or you have like a global CSS where you import it into your file, so it's all just in one thing. Actually, we have this in Remix, we have this CSS bundle href, which allows us to say import reach UI dialog style CSS, and that will show up in the bundle. So Remix will bundle it for you. So you just have a bunch of these imports at the top of your root, or even if you just put it in the component that uses that component, or in the file that uses that component, it will still show up in the CSS bundle href. If you're using Vite, pretty much the same thing. And so the cool thing about shipping standards is that other tools need to support those standards and can add extra helpers to make it easier for however that tool does it. So that's a long way to answer your question, but give them a CSS file.
No, that makes, well, I'm happy, I guess, to hear you actually outline all those pain points, because I was thinking this is probably something so simple and I just am not grasping how to do it. Like, and so that actually helps me validate that, like, okay, I'm not missing something. So it sounds like either, like, no matter what approach I take, they will need to do some type of thing where they like either add the CSS or like somewhere in their project. Like there's not a way to like just include it with just like the component, I guess, maybe, or I guess that.
Yeah, like, I mean, there technically is, but there are a lot of trade-offs when you try to do that, and so it's just better to just go with the straight up. Here's a CSS file and get that on the page somehow.
Okay, and if I'm working with I probably this is the last one. If I'm working with like a base CSS file that I want to like, you know, apply certain type of fonts and colors or whatever to like just all the components in the component library, but not necessarily talking about like the bundling, just like so they can have access to it. Do I have to like manually import that in like the style sheet for each component, or is there like, I guess within the component library, I don't know how to like.
Yeah. So like, so you've got a global CSS file that is like the core that everything else depends on.
Yeah, but I don't know if it feels like redundant to include those styles in each component style sheet, but I don't know if that's like the only way to do it.
It's definitely redundant and would be bad for the UX too, because now you're loading the same CSS for, you know, if I use two of those components, I've got duplicate CSS. So the solution to that would be like the gateway into getting into this component library is first you need to install this or add the CSS file.
Okay.
And then for each one of these components, they have their own CSS files that you also need to add. And then for your development, in your development environment, you would include that core CSS file in addition to the component CSS file. But yeah, it wouldn't be bundled into the CSS file that's published with that component.
Okay, so that core CSS file would be like where? Sorry, I don't know. I'm missing understanding. Like where would I put that? Like
I would probably publish that. Like if you're publishing all these components as individual packages, which I have mixed feelings about.
Right, we're not right now. No.
Okay, it's all one package.
Yeah.
I mostly think that's the right move. Yeah, it's probably the right move. I'll talk about that in a sec. So yeah, it would just be another file that you include in the package. And you say, okay, so step one to installing this component library is add the CSS file. And now step two for adding the accordion component is you import the accordion component this way and you get that CSS file onto the page somehow. And you can have some examples, like you probably just have a couple of apps that have maybe all of them are the same, and so you just have an example. Here's how you do it with Vite, and then like for anybody who's using Remix, here's how you would do that with Remix, and just give a couple of examples of how to get those CSS files on the page, and then just have it be consistent for all the components.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because I'm using Storybook right now to kind of like implement things, so I guess include it so that Storybook can kind of know where it is, and then I can kind of work with the individual component CSS, and then when the consuming app uses it, it would need to know how to kind of like get that, and then everything should get the base CSS, and then things should just kind of work, I guess. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, so on the subject of publishing individual packages, so one problem that you will probably face by publishing all the components in a single package is you'll end up with a lot of breaking changes. Right. So like you make some little breaking change that's just like almost nobody's using this tooltip, or even like lots of your components will be built on top of smaller primitives that you also publish just because it can be useful. And so you make a breaking change to one of those primitives, and now the entire package needs a major version bump, which is fine, but can be kind of annoying for people.
Yeah.
Honestly, as I say that, I'm like, grow up, kids. Like, it's fine. Who cares what that number is?
It's funny you mentioned that because like our company's thinking about going to like a monorepo. Like this is just like components for like certain reports. So it's not like a like consuming everywhere. But they've thought about, should we go monorepo like with a an X type of thing and individually package things. And I've seen it used. Like I know Radix allows you that opportunity to install. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to hear that you're providing this feedback because it's something they've talked about. And
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so then the alternative is, okay, well, let's break them all up into individual packages. Now you have a bunch of tooling you have to think about to make sure that like, okay, we update this one. Now we have to update like all these other ones and publish those as well. And the tooling exists. And so if you're okay getting the tooling going and everything, then everything's fine. But then on the consuming side of things, like I'm sure I've got an example in here where we've got like one. Well, I don't have it anymore because now I just put everything inside of Shad C and stuff. But let me see if I've got components UI. Yeah, here we go. So I've got 4 imports for my components, where if this were all just bundled into a single library, all of those imports could just be a single line. This matters less to me now that I have VS Code just updating my imports all the time. But yeah, like this can get really, really annoying really quick. And so what ends up happening is people get annoyed by like seeing 50 imports at the top of their file. And so now they're going to break up the file for no other reason than they just kind of feel funny about how many imports there are. But they're actually not making anything better. And depending on how good their tooling is, they're actually making things worse. Yeah, like personally, I like long files. I want to keep files as big as possible, as reasonable. And so, yeah, like splitting everything into individual components or packages just means you have a lot of imports. That doesn't matter a ton. So I guess what I'm saying is the big problem with putting everything into one package is you have major version bumps all the time, and that doesn't matter. It's fine. The big problem with spreading them out into multiple packages is you have a ton of imports. That really doesn't matter either. So what I'm saying is it doesn't matter. Choose whatever you want.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ken. I always appreciate the time.
Yeah, I enjoy chatting with you too, Alyssa. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right, we have a learner here. Are you just chilling or did you have a question here?
Hi, Kent. Thank you for hosting the office hours. I have posted my question just before the previous speaker's question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry, I missed yours. Okay, I'll take a look at this. Assuming I have a bunch of static HTML pages and only a few pages which need React, is it possible to have such a setup and remix that? Oh, yeah, I remember reading this. Yes, this is absolutely possible. And there are a couple of approaches you can take. It's actually super cool. So let's take this as an example. Well, let me make sure that I understand the question and everybody listening understands the question. So you have a test HTML that's a static page, and make abc.com/test load that page without the user having to use the HTML extension. And then all other routes which are not present in the public folder continue to load if it's defined in the app, for example. Otherwise show it 404. Okay, so for your first one, without the user having to use an HTML extension, that's the tricky piece, but we do have a solution for this. But let me first talk about like, what if we don't mind the HTML piece, because some people might not care and they have a similar question. So what you can do is just in the public directory, do test.html and oh, come on, there's gotta be like, where's my HTML thing? HTML sample, boom. Okay, test. And we're not loading any scripts or anything. We just say hello and get this thing going. And we say localhost test HTML. Okay, there we go. Okay, so there we have test with the HTML, but you don't want that. You want to be able to say just test without the HTML. I actually wonder, before we do the other thing I'm thinking, is if we make that a folder with an index HTML. Yeah, that's interesting. Too many redirects. Huh, fascinating. Well, yeah. Whoops. Yeah, so if you have the index HTML, that could be just the way that the server is configured. And you might be able to configure your server to handle this better. And so I've got my server is an Express server here, and there could be something that you can configure in the Express static to handle this. So that might be one avenue to pursue depending on where your server is. This is definitely the easiest way to do this because it's just regular HTML files and stuff. But that's not what we're going to do. What I would say is first, try that first before you do anything else, because that is definitely the easiest way to do this. Now, actually, I want to get that back because I want to copy that HTML. So let me get that. Come on, HTML sample. No, all right, there. Okay, test, and get rid of those, and hello world. All right, let me grab that and delete this. So if that doesn't work for you, if you can't figure out a way to get your server to handle it that way, then another thing you could do, oh, you know what? I just realized I am, this is very small. There we go. That should be a lot easier to see. Another thing that you can do is go into your routes and make a regular route. So we want it to be at /test. So it'll be test.tsx. But instead of exporting a component that now is going to have like all of your regular React stuff going on in here, you just want like, I just want to write HTML. Then instead you do a remix loader, and instead of returning JSON, you return a new response that has your HTML document. And then here we'll say our headers and content type text HTML. And now, if I go to test, I'm going to get my HTML document, and we can view source, and there it is. So you can, of course, you might not want to hard code it in a template literal, so you could put this in a file. So we could, with the version 2 routing and remix, or with the hybrid routes, the remix flat routes that we're using in the Epic stack, you can make this an index TSX, and that will still work exactly as it was before. And now we can make a test HTML where we can put the HTML document, and then this would be fs read file. Here, let's bring in fs from node fs promises. Await fs read file, index test HTML. And now you have the, hold on. Oh, yeah, that's kind of a bummer. So this is going to get bundled and moved. So you can't read it there. You'd have to put it in like a content directory or something like that. I wonder, actually, I think we could maybe do, no, you might be able to import it somehow. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure how that would work. But in any case, hopefully that gives you the idea of how you would accomplish this using a loader. Now, I'm going to say something even better, potentially, depending on what your use case is for this HTML document. If you don't mind writing this HTML or this document as React, and you just don't want React on the page, but you're fine with it being React that like created it in the first place, then what you can do is let's do a regular remix component. So remix component, this will be our test route, and we'll say this is a test. Okay, and now here, let me get rid of, let's just do this. We're going to call this test. We'll get rid of that. Okay, so we've got a test route. If I go to /test, it's inside of my whole app and everything, and maybe I'm fine with that. You know, depending on how you want it structured, you just apply the knowledge you have about a remix routing system to make it be what you want it to be. So what you can do though, like the problem is on this route, we've got all of React going on, and all of our chunks and all of that stuff. And that's what, if that's the thing you're trying to avoid, and it's not just, I don't want to write HTML, or I want to be able to author it in HTML, but you're rather just saying, I don't want React on the page, then that's actually really easy to do in Remix. You just come in here and you say, no scripts. You don't render the scripts on here. And now there are no scripts on the page. There's no React going on. And in fact, most of your app will actually still work, which is pretty awesome. Not all of it though. And there's reasons that we want JavaScript on the page. But if that's what you're going for, then you can just say no scripts on the page. Now, it sounds like you want some pages to have JavaScript, and other pages not to have JavaScript. And so what you can do is, let's say, here's our location, use location. And then we'll just say if location something, otherwise null. Or here, we'll do it this way. So we'd say location.path name is /test. And now no scripts on the page, but if I go to another page, we've got scripts. And so you can dynamically determine that. And you can make it an even better experience doing this by using another utility or another feature in Remix called the handle, which is an object that can be anything that you want it to be. And so this is, Remix has made a special namespace just for us to do whatever we want to with, and that's what the handle is. And so here we can say scripts false. And then we can get all of the routes that match using use matches. Oops. Hold on a second. Use matches. Yep. Oh man, I messed that up. Okay, import that. Matches. And we'll say matches dot sum. So if any of these matches dot handle dot scripts is false, then no scripts. And of course, TypeScript has no way of knowing what these handles are. Like this could be undefined. Like the handle ends up being of type any. It just doesn't know what it is. But this will work for our case here. So no scripts on the page because we had that export on this page, scripts on the page. So now you don't even have to worry about updating this. You just say on any page you don't want to have JavaScript on, you just add this handle scripts is false, and scripts won't show up on the page, which is pretty sweet, I think. So that's another option for you if you want to have some like regular HTML pages. Does that answer your question? And that would, like, everything that I shared satisfies your requirement for number 2. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, Ken, that is helpful. But I also have a question that in case a pure HTML file is already residing in the public folder, is there a way to basically make the router read that file directly instead of doing all the different suggestions that you suggested?
Yeah. So what I would suggest, if that is an important use case for you, is I would say go to your server, whatever server that you're using. If you're using the remix serve command, there's a different way. Actually, let me ask that first. So what are you using the regular remix serve, or are you using Express, or what are you using right now?
I am basically new to Remix, and this is the feature I'm specifically looking for. So I'm basically looking for a solution in React which can give me this kind of functionality. Got it.
Okay, so there are a couple of options for you. So if you're using the remix serve, which is what you'll get if you just say just the basics in remix server when you're creating your new project, that's the simplest option, and but yeah, it doesn't have as much flexibility. But what you can do is in your entry server at the very top here in handle request. This is your last chance to do something before the response is sent back. So all of your loaders will have been called and everything by this point. For what you're working on, that will probably not be a lot. Like you'll end up at this point, Remix is like, hey, I'm going to send a 404 because I didn't find anything. So what you can say is in your entry, you would go and read that file from the public directory. So I think we could do that with, let's see, path to public would be, yep, exactly that. So you would read, yeah, and then you'd say file, or let's see. You'd say if the request dot, or here, let's do response status, response status code is a 404, then it wasn't able to find any routes that match this thing. And so now you're going to look for the public file that matches what they're looking for. And then file exists with whatever Copilot's going to say. Come on, Copilot, you know how to do this. Try that. No, it's not going to do this for me. But yeah, so you do like fs dot access or whatever. I can't remember what this thing is called. Stat. Okay, here, let's bring it in. Let's do this for real. Fs from node fs promises. Okay. Fs dot stat public file. There we go. We're going to await that. And let's bring in path. Okay. So if the file exists, what happens here if it doesn't? I can't remember. File exist is file. I think it might actually throw if it's not if it doesn't exist. I think this might, yeah, catch false. There we go. Okay, so if file exists, then you'll read the file, contents. Oh, actually, so this will be a little bit different because we don't want the .html on there. So the file actually won't exist because this request URL won't have the HTML on it. So what we can do is just add a, yeah, exactly that, add .html. There we go. So then we're going to read that file, fs read, oh wait, fs read file, yes. There we go. And then return a new response file contents with headers, content type HTML. And I think that actually is going to work. So let's just try this. This is not the way that I would do it, probably, and I'll explain why in a second. But if you are using the Remix server, this is how you would do it. Okay, HTML sample, wahoo, and get rid of those and test HTML. Okay, great. So now I think this will work. No, oh, right. We've got to get rid of our test route here. So we're not doing that. We want these HTML files. Okay, let's see what went wrong here. First of all, let's get rid of this. Here, I'm going to clean up all this stuff that we did. Get rid of all that. Okay. And in the entry server, so we end up with 404. Let's pull this up and see what we can gather about why that didn't work. Public file exists. Okay, try that again. And oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Copilot, I blame you. Request URL, we actually want new URL path name. Okay, and that, there we go. That worked. Hooray. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on and review this, and then we'll talk about another solution. So now you're getting your test without the .html. You're able to put it in your public directory with the test.html. And this will work with any HTML file in the public directory. So when Remix finishes going through all of the loaders and stuff, it's going to come into here and it's going to say, okay, I've got all the data. I'm ready to render a React component for this. And when we're looking for /test, because there's no route for that in Remix, it's going to say, well, I'm going to send you a 404 because I couldn't find a route for that. We're going to say, well, maybe there's something in the public directory. So let me find that path. And based on the path name that we're currently looking at, let's add a .html and see if that file exists. And if it does, then we'll send the contents of that file as HTML. And that's it. And now you can add any HTML file. You can put this in a subdirectory. So this is a HTML file.html. And we'll stick that there. HTML file. And then we go to, this is a, did I say an HTML file? I can't remember. I think it's there we go. So like that totally works exactly as you would expect. So this is a fine solution, and it does work with the regular Remix server. But yeah, I'm going to keep that. But if you're using here, and actually, you know what? I'll just stick this in the Discord so you don't have to type it up again if you decide to go this direction. There we go. Yeah, if you're using Express or Fastify or anything that allows you to do anything before Remix shows up, then I would suggest going into that server and configuring this somehow. So I'll betcha that Express static serve HTML without extension. Yep, here it is. There it is. Yep, it's just an option. Index false. Extensions HTML. So if we go here, yep, and index false. Boom. And now I can remove all this stuff I just did. So no changes here. Let's get rid of that. And yeah, I removed that. And that still works. And I don't have to do any weird stuff. So if you are, I mean, that wasn't actually all that weird, but this is even better because it will skip going through all of the rest of this stuff. So it's not going to have to worry about going through Remix and calling loaders and everything that are going to be ignored anyway. So this would definitely be the better way to do that. Yeah, did that answer your question?
Yes. And what if I don't want to use any server and I want the complete application to load on, say, an S3 bucket?
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, so if that's what you want, then you're not going to be using the Remix server because Remix is a server. It's a server side framework. And so I would, first of all, think long and hard about it because the better user experience is only possible with a server. You are very limited on the level of user experience you can give your users if you're not using a server. But for some use cases, it really doesn't matter that much. And so that's fine. So if you are, if you fit within that, then what I would suggest is using React Router and not using Remix. React Router, especially 6.4 plus, is really great and has a lot of the features that that Remix has. You're not going to get anything that requires a server. But yeah, you'll get loaders and actions and fetchers and all of that. It's really, really useful. And I would just use React Router with Vite, and then yeah, you can deploy that to a S3 bucket. And then if you're putting it on an S3 bucket, getting the extensionless feature that we just talked about, that seems to be a requirement for you. I don't I don't know. That would be something you'd have to configure with S3 or your CDN. And I don't know how you do that. I expect it's possible. I'm pretty sure it's possible with Netlify. And so it's probably a really common ask for most CDNs. So yeah, but I can't tell you the answer to that.
Thanks, Kent. Would you have time for another question?
Yeah, sure.
I've pasted some routes in the chat. So, say, for example, I have 4 different repositories, or I have basically segregated the complete application into 4 different repositories, and I want to serve them in such a way that abc.com is served from S3, and the rest 3 can be like server-side applications. Do you know how I can achieve this kind of setup?
So yeah, you're gonna need some sort of middle layer that is able to route requests to each of these applications. And like depending on where you're deploying to, sounds like AWS. I am pretty limited on my knowledge on AWS services, and so I can't tell you, but I 100% they absolutely have a solution for this. If you were doing your own VPS or something, you'd use like a Nginx thing or something like that. But yeah, this is definitely possible, and certainly within AWS you can do this. But I do not know how you do that.
Thanks, Kent.
Yep, sure thing. Okay, let's get to the last couple questions. Oh yeah, I answered this one already. Yeah, so folks, by the way, I normally do my announcements at the beginning of office hours, but if you haven't heard, then I'm excited to tell you that volume 1 of the Full Stack Workshop series is on sale right now, and it's huge. 8 workshops over the course of 4 weeks, starting in mid-July, and it's going to be amazing. We've got a great group of folks already signed up to come, and yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So take a look at this and ask your boss about paying for your education, which they should. So anyway, Taryn was asking about this. And oh, by the way, you also get a free license to Epic Web Dev when that launches later this year. So that'll be pretty sweet too. But yeah, asking about another full round of the workshops. And yeah, I'm not positive whether I'll do that or not, but I might. So look forward to that. Stay tuned. Okay, great. Let me ask. Sibylis had some questions, and let's see. Do you use Redis for any type of caching services? I used to, but I do not anymore. I will add a link to my blog post where I talk about that. Where I migrated from a Postgres cluster and Redis as well to distributed SQLite. So it wasn't just Postgres that I migrated from. I also migrated from Redis. Trying to retrieve some posts from my MongoDB database, but it's taking a lot of time to get the posts. I implemented Redis caching in my API, but now I'm facing a problem that's returning some posts from the cache every time I hit the API. The same post. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. How do I get different posts when I hit the API? Instagram uses Redis and give me new and different posts every time I scroll so fast. How do you balance this case? So yeah, I can tell you right now without looking at the code that your problem is the key. The cache key needs to be unique for for whatever shows up in that database. So effectively, what's happening is the cache key is the ID of the entry, and you are either, well, yeah, you're writing to a specific cache key and trying to read from that and expect something else from that. So you need to make sure that every cache entry has a unique cache key. So let's look at this. So you got your slash posts. You have your post request query page. Okay, so you want to have that's going to be part of your cache key. So every time they're on page 1, they should get the same posts. When they're on page 2, they should get those posts, and so on and so forth. That's probably not desirable because there's probably other things that factor into what posts should show up on which pages. So you are doing this user aggregate. I'm not sure what. So yeah, effectively everything that is in this query should be represented in the cache key in some way. And additionally, if you can't for some reason, then you need to also think about cache invalidation strategy, which is kind of a tricky subject. So I am limited on my time here, but pretty soon, in like a week or two, oh, actually, you know what? I think I've already got a recording of this talk. Oh, did they publish that yet? I don't know. I don't know if they did. Yes, FW days 2023 YouTube. Let's just find their YouTube channel. I think actually I gave another talk there. Here we go. Here's where their YouTube channel will be. So this is my previous talk about this. Let's see if they published my latest talk about this. They've been publishing recently. Yeah, so that's my full stack components. Oh, really? Did they translate my talk? How cool is that? Cool. That's cool. I didn't know they were going to do that. Okay, so it looks like they are uploading talks right now. So I would keep an eye out for this because my talk about caching, caching for cache, will explain this in much greater detail. And I'm also giving it at a conference here in Utah if you want to come out to Utah. And I'm also going to be putting it on a new page on Epic Web Dev /talks, which is not published yet. I didn't even know that they had even a page here yet. But yeah, we're going to start publishing some of my talks here that are specially recorded for Epic Web. So keep an eye on all of that. Here, I guess I'll stick that in here too. And I hope the little bit that I said was helpful. You just need to make sure that your cache key includes all of the factors that go into what makes the value unique. And yeah, I guess there's also the slides that might be helpful too. So you can give that a look. I hope that helps. Good luck. Okay, and then I think you asked another question later. What do people mean when they say a good developer can write scalable software? What does this line mean, and how do I know if the thing I build is scalable or not, especially for MERN stack apps? Well, so when you're working on or building it on top of technologies and you're wondering whether they're scalable, you can just ask yourself whether or not anybody has built anything with those technologies that scale. And I would say people have probably. I can't think of any examples right off the top of my head, but I'm sure this is that some people have. I believe actually Wes Boss has built lots of his stuff on top of the MERN stack. Also, it depends on how what level of scale you actually care about, like matters for you. I found something to be kind of interesting, and that is let me see if I can find this. Users. What was Tan Stack doing? What are you, what's going on, Tanner? Huh, I'll have to look at that later. Okay. Let's try that again. Now Tanner just threw me off. What was I looking for? Scalable. Yeah, users. I've got here it is. Yeah, so something I thought was kind of interesting was I just wondered, we talk a lot about scaling to millions of users and that sort of thing, where most of us are way less than millions. Like we're even, most of us are thousands or less. In fact, a lot of people are just a couple hundred users or less. And so, yeah, like if that's you, then I wouldn't worry a thing about scalability. I would worry a lot more about changeability, like how easy is it to adapt to changes, or how fast can I ship features and stuff. I wouldn't care a thing about scalability if I was in this 67% of people, which is mind-boggling because these are the people who follow me on Twitter. And so they're even, this is probably even more pronounced. I don't know, maybe not. But at least for my audience, thousands or less, that makes a lot of sense. And then I quoted this and I thought I did. Because I did another request per second, another poll. Requests per second. There it is. Another poll about, oh no, that's a different, that was a much earlier poll. That was kind of trying to get at something else. Oh man, I did another poll that was like, how many requests per second does your app experience? And again, like most people are not at a very large scale. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about like, am I writing scalable software? Like maybe it doesn't matter, but let's say you are working at Amazon or Netflix and building their .com offering, whatever. How do you know whether what you're building is scalable? You often don't really. When you're working at that level of scale, there are so many moving pieces in what you're building where some pieces are totally going to scale to that level and other pieces are totally not. And there's just not really a great way to know from the outset. You develop an intuition for some of this stuff as the more you get into it. But especially at that level of scale, then you're probably doing things that you haven't seen anybody else do, or there aren't really good resources on. And so like, you're just going to have to do a lot of testing. Often the technologies that you want to use will probably have done some testing. So unless you're building those technologies, then yeah, you'll have to do that testing yourself. But if you are using technologies from somebody else, like some library or something, they probably have done some testing. And so you just think about, okay, how many requests per second am I going to expect? And, you know, how many writes versus reads, all of that stuff you got to consider, and then measure it according to what the technologies are. A good developer can write scalable software. I think good developers can also write really bad software. Like we make mistakes and stuff. So anyway, hope that kind of answers your question a little bit. Probably not, but I hope it at least helps. Okay, that's it. I'm over time, but I started late. So if anybody has other questions, feel free to give me a call. You can record your call in the browser and I will respond, and our conversation will turn into a podcast. And I think that is pretty sweet. And I need to add paging to this because I've now got over 150 episodes. So PRs are welcome, actually. If anybody wanted to make it so that it was more like this, with seasons and stuff, I have no problem going into the podcast that this is served through Transistor, and splitting some of these things up into seasons. If anybody wants to make that contribution, that'd be sweet. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks everybody for joining, and I hope you all have a marvelous day. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kent.
Thanks, Kent. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I probably will be live streaming. Well, I might be live streaming. I need to work on workshops and stuff. So feel free to watch me do that if I end up live streaming later.